Hello and welcome to the second video of Section 6, creating a Windows 10 virtual desktop machine image. To build the desktop there are several steps to complete as we discussed in the overview of this section, and in this video we're going to complete the first part of that build process. First, we will build the virtual machine, configuring the virtual hardware to reflect the fact that the desktop is running as a VM. This also includes configuring the virtual machine BIOS settings. Once these steps have been completed, we can then move on and install the guest operating system, in this example Windows 10, before installing the VMware Tools software to ensure that we are running the correct VMware drivers and tools required for a virtual desktop machine. Before we get on with the build process, we need to look at the specifications of the virtual desktop machine from a hardware perspective, and what we're going to configure. For our example lab virtual desktop machine, we're going to configure it with 2 CPUs. A single CPU may be sufficient for lighter workloads, but this is where your assessment data will come in useful. The network card should be configured to use the VMXNet3 network driver. We need 4 GB of memory as we're going to be installing a 64-bit operating system. We need to ensure that the SCSI controller is set to LSI Logic SAS and leave the hard disk size as the default size. There is no need to configure the graphics card at this stage, as any settings here will be overridden by the desktop pool settings. The optical drive should be set to client device, so that you're able to mount ISO images to the virtual desktop machine so that you can install any software, and the diskette drive should be set to disabled in the virtual machine BIOS. This should also be done for the same as parallel and serial ports that need to also be disabled. Another important factor when configuring the size of the hardware is not to fall into the trap of oversizing your virtual desktop machines. For example, if you only need 1 CPU, then just configure 1 CPU. As we've said before, this is why the assessment data is critical. So now we're going to build our first virtual desktop machine image, and this is going to be our Windows 10 image, and we're going to do this in our vCenter web client. So we've logged on to the vSphere client here, as you can see, and we can see our infrastructure here. This is our VCS2 virtual center machine. There's our PVO data center and our cluster and our host. So to create our machine, we're just going to go over here and click on Actions. Then we're going to click the option for New Virtual Machine. And then we see our new virtual machine configuration screen. And the first thing we need to do is select a creation type. So what actually are we going to build? So in this instance, we're going to build a new virtual machine. So we click Next to continue. And then we need to select a name and a folder. So what are we going to call the virtual machine? So we are going to call this Windows 10 Gold image. And then we're going to put that in our PVO data center. We click Next to continue. That just validates. So now we need to select the destination of the compute resource, i.e. where's it going to run. That's going to be on our Horizon cluster and on our host server there with the IP 131. So we check that succeeded. Next to continue. Now we have our select storage. So where is the virtual disk file for this particular virtual machine going to be stored? So we are going to put this on our VM data store. That's our data store that's specifically for our virtual desktops. And we can also create a VM storage policy if we want to. So we can go for a VM encryption policy, vSAN default storage, or virtual volumes. So we're just going to go with the data store default. Check that it has succeeded the compatibility checks. Next to continue. And now we see our select compatibility. So this is what version of hardware this particular virtual machine is going to use. So we can see here we have a compatible with drop-down box, and we can go all the way back to ESX 3.5, 4, 5, 5.1, 5.5.6. We can even make a workstation compatibility if you want to then move that across to a VM workstation solution. But in this instance, we're going to go with ESX 6.5 and later, which, as we see here, this virtual machine uses hardware version 13. So we need to watch out for some of the hardware versions because some features may or may not be available. So for some of the latest features, then you will need the latest hardware version for the virtual machine. So once you've selected that, we click Next to continue. Now we need to select a guest OS. So what is the virtual desktop machine going to be running? So in the guest OS family, we're going to select Windows, it's going to be a Windows machine, and the OS version. this is going to be a Windows 10 64-bit virtual desktop machine. So we select those. Next to continue. And then we have our customize hardware screen. So this is where we can create and customize our virtual hardware. So the first option is for CPU. So as this is a Windows 10 virtual desktop, we're going to give it 2 CPUs. We're going to leave it with 4 gig of memory, and we're going to create a 32 gig hard drive. We need to make sure we use the LSI Logic SAS SCSI adapter for our hard drive. That's going to give us the best performance. And then we go down to our new network. So if we expand the new network, so this is our actual network, so it's going to be connected to the VM network. So select the appropriate network this virtual machine is going to be connected to. We want to connect it at power on, but what we do need to do is change the adapter type to VMXnet3. So we shall do that. So now we've connected our network card to be the latest driver. The next thing we need to do is, as we're building a new machine, we need to create a link to the install media. So what we're going to do is we're going to expand the new CD DVD drive option. And then from the drop down, we're going to go for a data store ISO file. We could have host device or a content library ISO file. So what we've done is we've copied some ISO files for the install media onto our data store on our host server. So we click data store ISO. Then we see our select file screen pop up. So now we need to navigate to where our ISO images are actually stored. They're in data store 1. If we expand, there we go, we can see our ISO images. And then we've got 2 in here. We've got Windows 7, Windows 10. This is going to be a Windows 10 machine, so we're going to select the ISO for Windows 10. OK. Then we need to make sure that we check the connect at power on, otherwise the device won't be connected and therefore the machine won't boot. And if we scroll down, we have USB, video card, so we don't need to do anything with the video card because when we create our desktop pools, that will override any setting here. So the setting in the desktop pool will actually dictate what the video card is going to be. So we also have other, so we could add additional hardware. If we scroll back up to the top, we could add a new device if you were adding something specific. So if you click on add new device, we can add shared PCI devices. So if you had an NVIDIA card, we could create those. If you wanted a second network adapter, a second hard drive, we could connect those there. So the other thing we need to do is we just need to click on the option for VM options. And we need to scroll down to our boot options, expand boot options, expand the option for firmware. And we see this option here for force BIOS setup. What we need to do is when the machine boots, we want to go into the BIOS setup first. And the reason we want to do this is we need to disable some of the hardware elements like floppy disks and parallel ports. They don't exist in a virtual machine, and the machine could try and access them, cause delays, cause performance, so we shut them off. So we're going to check the box because we want to go into the BIOS the first time this machine boots. If you're happy with all of the options there, we're going to click Next to continue, and then we land at our summary screen, our ready to complete. So this is going to tell us what we're doing. So we're provisioning a new virtual machine. It's called Windows 10 Gold Image. It's in that data center on that host in that data store. It's going to be Microsoft Windows 10 64 bits. It's got 2 CPUs, 4 gig, a network card attached to the VM network using the VMXnet3 network driver, SCSI controller, new disk of 32 gig, stored on the VM data store, and then our VM storage policy, etc. So once you're happy that that is the correct configuration, finish, and then we'll see that that virtual machine is going to be created. So here we see the machine, the Windows 10 Gold Image. So if we click on there, you'll see the summary. This is what we configured. Obviously it's not using any resource because it's not yet powered on, which is our next task. So actions, power, power on. So that will now power on our virtual machine. So it's going to pop up a warning saying VMware Tools isn't installed. Nothing's installed yet because there's no operating system, so we'll come back to that one. So we can launch Remote Console to the machine. Just to remind you there that if you haven't downloaded the Remote Console software, then you need to download it, and you can download that from there. We already have it installed, so we will close that. And now you will see the BIOS screen, because we asked it to boot into the BIOS screen when the machine booted up. Let's just make that a touch bigger. So what we need to do here is make a few configuration changes. We can see here we've got disabled our time. It's just a standard BIOS. So we're going to use the right arrow to move across. Then we use the down arrow to go to I/O device configuration. And then we can see it lands on serial port, which is set to auto. So we need to change that. We press return, arrow up, press return on disabled. Do the same for the serial port B. Same for the parallel port. And then finally the same for the floppy disk controller. So they're now all disabled. So once you've configured that, it's an F10. Set up confirmation, save configuration changes and exit now. Y for yes. And now the machine will save those configuration changes. It's going to mount the ISO image from our CD. And then you will see the Windows 10 setup screen appear. So what you need to do at this point is go through your standard Windows 10 build, if you like, add it to the domain, make some setups changes, obviously patch, make sure it's up to date, until you're at the point where you're 100% happy with the operating system installation. Once we've done that, then we can come back and actually configure the VMware tools. So here we just see the Windows 10 setup. So it's just a case of going through the Windows 10 setup. So now that Windows 10 is built and ready, the next thing we need to do is go back and install our VMware tools, because at the moment we don't have the correct drivers. So therefore you'll see that it's not connected to any network because there's no network driver, and the display settings are pretty basic as well. So if we go back to our vSphere console, we can literally just click the Install VMware Tools link there. And we see the pop-up box saying Install VMware Tools. It tells us all about VMware Tools, that it improves graphics, mouse, networking, etc. by applying the correct drivers. Those drivers are the ones based on the operating system or the guest OS that we selected. So we click on Mount, which will now mount the VMware Tools into our Windows 10 desktop machine. So in a second we'll see that pop up. There we go, DVD drive VMware Tools, tap to choose what happens. We're going to run the Setup64, so that's mounted the installer for VMware Tools. Just click on yes on the UAC, and now VMware Tools is going to be prepared for installation. So we can work through the installation and put all the correct drivers on our Windows 10 desktop. So we get the graphics performance, it'll connect to the network, plus all the other drivers and features. So now we see the welcome to the installation wizard for VMware Tools. So we're just going to click next on the first window, and then we can choose a setup type, typical, complete or custom. So if we just go into custom for now, we can see what gets installed. So here's the list of drivers. So our Power Virtual SCSI driver, memory control, mouse, USB, video, audio, our VMXNet 3 for our network. If we want to have the offloading of the virus scanning, there's our NSX file introspective driver. So if we were going to use one of the antivirus offloaded scanning solutions, then we would install that as well, and also the shared folders. So we're just going to click next on the defaults. We'll click install. That will now start to copy the files, copy the drivers, load the services, and so on until we have a machine running the VMware Tools, which will give us the better user experience. So there goes the VMCI driver, starting the services. There's the network driver being installed, USB, mouse, memory, the video driver. The screen will start to flicker when we install the video driver as it selects the right resolution and changes the video driver. because we've installed the network driver now, you will have also seen the network box pop up. Do you want the PC to be discoverable? We just click yes on there. Installing the performance monitoring tools for vRealize for Horizon. Finally, we remove the backup files that were used during the setup. And then we see the completed the VMware Tools setup wizard screen. So we literally click finish. We also see now, because we've loaded the drivers, that's the Windows ISO image just popped up as a D drive because we've gone back to that now. VMware Tools is finished. So because we selected to mount that drive, we will now see that as a disk. So we can just close that. And on the VMware Tools, we click on finish and it says we must restart the system for the effects to take place because we've installed drivers and services. So we need to reboot the machine. So we literally click yes to reboot. So the Windows 10 machine will restart. It'll load all the correct drivers. We'll be able to select the video resolution and so on. So that now completes our installation of our Windows 10 Gold image. Now that we've built the image for the Windows 10 virtual desktop machine, the next step is to optimize it to run as a virtual desktop machine.